The sun had just begun to rise over the small frontier town of Willow Creek, casting a golden glow over the dusty streets and wooden buildings. Samuel, a lone rancher in his early 30s, walked slowly through the marketplace. He had lived most of his life alone, tending to his small ranch on the outskirts of town. Life was quiet, predictable, and sometimes lonely. Samuel preferred it that way. He enjoyed the calm of the open fields, the rhythm of the animals, and the simple satisfaction of hard work. But this morning was different. As he passed the stalls, he noticed something that made him pause. Among the merchants selling vegetables, tools, and fabrics, there stood a woman unlike anyone he had ever seen. She was tall, much taller than most women, and her presence was striking. What made her even more unusual was the plain sack covering her head. It looked heavy and rough, tied loosely under her chin. Nobody in the marketplace seemed to speak to her. People whispered behind their hands, casting curious glances, but no one approached. Samuel stopped and watched for a long moment. There was something about her posture, strong and upright, that made her seem proud, even though she remained silent. The sun highlighted her shadow on the ground, stretching it longer than any other shadow in the square. The townsfolk were uneasy, but Samuel felt a spark of curiosity he could not ignore. "Who is she?" he asked a nearby fruit vendor, a kindly old man named Peter. Peter shrugged. "No one knows, Samuel. She just appeared here a few days ago. They say she came from a town far to the east, but no one has seen her family. Some people call her the Giant Bride." Samuel raised his eyebrows. "Giant Bride?" "Aye," Peter said. "Tall as a barn door, they say. And she wears that sack on her head all the time. Some folks think she's hiding something. Others just think she's strange. But no one has dared speak to her." Samuel frowned, but felt no fear. Instead, he felt a strange sense of purpose, as if fate had led him here. He moved closer to her, carefully, without drawing too much attention. She did not flinch or move. Her body was calm yet alert. Samuel noticed the strength in her hands, the firmness in her stance. She looked like someone who had faced hardship and survived. A merchant noticed Samuel examining her. "Don't bother with her," he said. "She's not for sale, or at least no one knows if she is. Just leave her be." But Samuel was not deterred. Something about her called to him. He took a deep breath and approached the woman. "Hello," he said gently. "My name is Samuel. I mean no harm." The woman made no sound. Her head remained bowed slightly beneath the sack. Samuel studied her eyes, the small slits visible through the fabric. They were dark, serious, and intelligent. There was fear there, perhaps, but also a quiet strength. A hush fell over the marketplace as people noticed Samuel talking to her. Some shook their heads, muttering about his foolishness. Others simply stared, waiting to see what would happen. Samuel could feel their judgment, but he ignored it. He was determined to understand this mysterious woman. "Are you alone?" he asked softly. Still no answer came. He paused, considering what to do next. Samuel had always been a practical man. He knew that if he wanted to help her, or even just understand her, he would need to act. And so he made a bold decision. He turned to Peter and asked quietly, "Do you think anyone would sell her?" Peter looked surprised. "Sell her, Samuel? That's not something we do lightly." "People aren't objects, I know," Samuel said. "But I mean, if she has no family, no home, maybe she needs someone to take care of her. I can do that. I'll pay what's fair." The old man hesitated, then looked at the woman. There was a long silence, and Samuel could see the tension in the marketplace. Finally, Peter sighed. "If you insist, I suppose $2 is enough. No one else seems to want her, and I suppose it's better than leaving her out here. But remember, Samuel, treat her well. She's not a toy." Samuel nodded solemnly. "I will. I promise." He carefully approached the woman again and extended his hand. "Come with me," he said gently. "I'll take care of you." For the first time, she moved. Slowly, deliberately, she reached out and took his hand. Samuel could feel the strength in her grip. It was firm, steady, and unafraid. The townsfolk gasped. Whispers spread through the marketplace like wildfire. Samuel simply smiled and led her toward the edge of town, ignoring the curious eyes on them. As they walked, Samuel spoke softly, trying to comfort her. "Don't worry. You're safe now. I won't let anyone hurt you." The woman remained silent but walked willingly. She seemed to trust him, though it was impossible to know for sure. Samuel felt a sense of awe and respect for her. She was strong, mysterious, and brave, qualities he admired deeply. By the time they reached Samuel's ranch, the sun was high in the sky. The ranch was simple, a small wooden house, a few barns, and wide-open fields stretching in every direction. Samuel opened the gate and led the woman inside. She looked around with curiosity, eyes wide behind the sack. "This is your home now," Samuel said, smiling gently. "You'll have food, a place to rest, and someone to look out for you." She did not respond with words, but she nodded slightly. It was enough for Samuel. He understood that trust would take time, and he was willing to be patient. That night, Samuel watched her from across the room as she unpacked a few belongings she had brought with her. She moved gracefully despite her size, and Samuel realized just how unusual and remarkable she truly was. He felt a strange mixture of curiosity, admiration, and a protective instinct. As he lay down that night, Samuel thought about the day's events. How strange life could be, how a simple walk through the marketplace had changed everything. He thought about the $2 exchange, the silent giant of a woman, and the long road ahead. He did not know what the future held, but one thing was certain: his life would never be the same again. And somewhere deep inside, he felt that this mysterious woman had come into his life for a reason. The morning sun stretched its golden fingers across the ranch, casting long shadows of the wooden fences and grazing animals. Samuel rose early, as he always did, the smell of fresh hay filling the air. Today, however, felt different. The giant woman, whom he had quietly begun to call simply Giant in his mind, had spent her first night at the ranch. Samuel watched from a distance as she stepped outside, her tall frame moving gracefully among the barns and pens. She had not removed the sack completely, but the way she looked at the world suggested curiosity. Samuel approached her carefully, not wanting to startle her. "Good morning," he said softly. "I hope you slept well." She nodded slightly, the movement small but deliberate. Samuel noticed how her eyes reflected the sunlight, bright and thoughtful. She did not speak, but Samuel had learned that communication did not always require words. Her presence alone carried meaning. The day began slowly. Samuel showed her around the ranch, the vegetable garden, the chicken coop, and the small herd of cattle grazing in the fields. She watched quietly, absorbing every detail. Occasionally, she reached out to touch something, a fence post, a wheelbarrow, and her large hands handled everything with surprising delicacy. Samuel smiled to himself. She was strong but careful, as if she understood the value of what she touched. "You seem to know how to handle animals," Samuel said, watching her gently stroke one of the cows. She tilted her head slightly, acknowledging him without speaking. Samuel laughed softly. "Well, that's something. I think we'll get along just fine." As the morning passed, Samuel taught her simple chores. She carried buckets of water from the well with ease, fed the chickens, and helped gather eggs. Though she was silent, her movements were precise, and it was clear she had experience in hard work. Samuel admired her patience and focus. By midday, the sun hung high in the sky, and the heat began to press down on the ranch. Samuel brought out a simple lunch, bread, cheese, and fresh milk, and they sat on the wooden steps of the farmhouse. He offered her a piece of bread. She took it carefully, her long fingers wrapping around it as if it were precious. "You must be hungry," Samuel said. "I know this is all new to you, but don't worry, you'll get used to it." She nodded again, and for the first time Samuel noticed a faint smile beneath the sack. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it made him feel that perhaps she was beginning to trust him. The afternoon passed with more work. Samuel showed her how to mend fences, repair tools, and tend to the garden. She was a quick learner, and Samuel found himself quietly impressed. Despite her size, she moved with care and precision, never rushing, never breaking anything. Occasionally, she looked at Samuel with her dark, thoughtful eyes, and he felt as if she were trying to understand him as much as he was trying to understand her. By late afternoon, the two sat by the small pond at the edge of the ranch. Samuel skipped stones across the water while the giant woman watched silently. The pond reflected the golden light of the setting sun, and for a moment the world seemed still. "You know," Samuel said softly, "most people would never take the time to understand someone like you. They would just judge and walk away." She shifted slightly but did not respond. Still, her gaze remained fixed on him, attentive and aware. Samuel felt a connection forming, Not through words, but through shared moments, shared effort, and quiet understanding. As the days turned into weeks, life at the ranch settled into a new rhythm. Samuel and the giant woman worked side by side, tending to the animals, fixing fences, and harvesting vegetables. The townsfolk began to whisper less about her. Some were still curious, but most had come to accept her presence. Samuel noticed that she began to take small steps toward independence, carrying water without assistance, feeding the chickens alone, and even repairing small tools. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Samuel found her sitting by the barn, her knees drawn up, staring at the sky. He walked quietly toward her, not wanting to disturb her thoughts. "You've come a long way," he said softly. "I'm proud of you." She turned her head slightly, and though she did not speak, her eyes held a depth of emotion that touched Samuel deeply. He realized that she was beginning to feel at home, not just on the ranch, but in this strange, quiet life they were building together. Night fell, and the ranch was bathed in the silver light of the moon. Samuel tended to the animals one last time before heading inside. He found her by the fireplace, cleaning a few small tools. She looked up as he entered, and for the first time, she placed her hands in a gesture that suggested gratitude. Samuel smiled and nodded. "You're learning," he said simply, "and you're doing well. You don't need to be afraid here. This is your home, too." She did not speak, but she stayed close, moving with confidence and calm. Samuel realized that their bond was growing stronger, built on trust, patience, and mutual respect. Though words were few, their understanding of each other was becoming clearer with every shared chore, every quiet moment, and every act of care. Over the next few days, Samuel began to notice small changes. She started responding to his gestures, mimicking his expressions, and even attempting simple words.
He encouraged her gently, never forcing her.
Understanding that true connection could not be rushed. One afternoon, a neighbor came by the ranch curious about the tall, silent woman who had become part of Samuel's life. "How is she doing?" the neighbor asked, peering at the giant woman. "She's adjusting," Samuel replied. "She's strong and clever, and she's learning to trust." "That's what matters most," the neighbor nodded, impressed. "You've got patience, Samuel." "Not many men would do what you're doing," Samuel shrugged. "It's not about patience. It's about respect. She deserves that much." As the seasons changed, so did the bond between Samuel and the giant woman. They worked together, laughed silently at small mistakes, and shared quiet evenings by the fireplace. Though she remained largely silent, her actions spoke volumes. Every chore she completed, every step she took toward independence strengthened the connection between them. Samuel often thought about the day he had purchased her for $2. What had seemed like a strange decision at the time had become the most important choice of his life. He realized that love, trust, and companionship could grow in the most unexpected ways. And though their story was only beginning, Samuel felt a deep sense of hope. He knew that in this quiet, simple life on the ranch, something remarkable was taking root, a bond that neither time nor circumstance could easily break. And so, life continued at the ranch. The giant woman remained a mystery in many ways, yet she was slowly becoming a part of Samuel's world. Together they faced the work, the quiet moments, and the endless horizon. And Samuel knew without a doubt that the days ahead would hold even more surprises, challenges, and perhaps in time, the joy of a friendship, and something more that neither of them had expected. The days at the ranch had settled into a quiet rhythm. Samuel and the giant woman had grown more comfortable with each other. Chores were completed together, the animals were cared for, and even the neighbors had begun to see them as a pair. Yet despite all this time spent together, one thing remained. She had not spoken a single word. Samuel had long accepted that her silence was a part of who she was. He respected it and never pressed her. Still, a small hope lingered in his heart, that one day she might speak. It was not about words themselves, but about truly knowing her. One late afternoon, a summer storm rolled in. The sky darkened with clouds, and the wind swept across the fields, tossing hay and leaves in its path. Samuel was repairing a section of the fence near the barn when he noticed the giant woman standing by the old oak tree, watching the clouds gather. Her tall frame swayed slightly in the gusts of wind, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "Storm's coming," Samuel called to her over the wind. "We should head inside." She did not respond, but she began walking toward the barn. Samuel followed, carrying a few tools he had been using. Lightning flickered across the sky, briefly illuminating the tall figure beside him. The sight struck Samuel. The woman looked almost like a figure from a legend, both strong and mysterious. As they reached the barn, a sudden gust of wind knocked over a lantern that Samuel had left on the ground. It rolled across the floor, spilling a small puddle of oil. Samuel lunged to catch it, but the lantern tipped too quickly, flames flickering dangerously close to the hay. Without thinking, the giant woman moved fast. She grabbed the lantern with both hands and set it safely on a metal shelf. Samuel froze, astonished by her quick reflexes. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice carrying relief. "You saved the barn." She stood tall, breathing steadily, and looked at him. Something about her gaze seemed different that day, more intense, more present. Samuel could feel that a change was coming. "Are you scared of storms?" he asked gently, trying not to startle her. She did not answer. But as Samuel spoke, he noticed her hands fidgeting slightly with the edge of the sack covering her head. For the first time, he saw hesitation in her movements, a sign that she might be ready to do something new. That evening, after the storm had passed and the air smelled fresh with rain, Samuel lit a small fire in the fireplace. They sat across from each other, the warmth filling the room. Samuel tried again, speaking softly. "I know you don't talk much." "That's okay, but I want you to know that I want to understand you. You can trust me." She watched him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she reached up and touched the sack over her head. Samuel's heart raced. Could this be the moment? Then, very carefully, she lifted the sack just enough for her lips to be seen. Samuel held his breath. Her face was calm, yet her eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and curiosity. For the first time, he could see the lines of her expression, the small curve of her mouth, and the delicate features he had only imagined before. "Your name," Samuel said gently. I don't know it." "Please, tell me your name." For a long, tense moment, there was silence. Then, almost like a whisper carried by the firelight, she spoke. "Ilara." Samuel's eyes widened. "Ilara," he repeated, tasting the word. It was simple yet beautiful, and it carried a weight he could not explain. "It's wonderful to meet you, Ilara." A small, shy smile appeared on her lips. Samuel could feel a wave of relief and joy wash over him. After so many days of silence, they had crossed a bridge. Words at last had been spoken. "Ilara," he said softly, "you are safe here. You don't need to hide anymore." She nodded slightly, still shy, but her eyes held a glimmer of trust. Samuel realized that their relationship was changing. She was no longer just a silent presence on his ranch. She was a person with thoughts, feelings, and a voice. The next few days were quiet but filled with small, meaningful moments. Ilara began speaking in short phrases, mostly to answer Samuel's questions or to comment on daily tasks. Her voice was soft, melodic, and carried a strength that matched her tall frame. Every word she spoke deepened the connection between them. One afternoon, while tending to the garden, Ilara turned to Samuel and said, "I like this place." Samuel smiled warmly. "I'm glad. You belong here, Ilara. You always have." She looked at him, and for the first time Samuel saw genuine emotion in her eyes, happiness, comfort, and trust. It was a turning point. Samuel knew that their bond had moved beyond mere companionship. Something deeper was growing, built on patience, understanding, and respect. The breakthrough in communication also brought new confidence to Ilara. She began to help more actively, suggesting improvements to the garden, helping with the fences, and even organizing the animals in ways that made Samuel marvel at her intelligence and intuition. Samuel found himself learning from her, just as she was learning from him. At night, they would sit by the fireplace, and Samuel would tell her stories of the town, of his childhood, and of the ranch. Ilara listened attentively, occasionally commenting or asking questions. Each word she spoke was a gift, a reminder that patience and kindness could build bridges where fear and silence had once lived. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Samuel looked at Ilara and said softly, "I feel like we've known each other much longer than we have." "Don't you?" Ilara nodded, her long hair catching the last rays of sunlight. She did not speak, but her eyes shone with agreement. Samuel understood. Trust and understanding had grown between them, stronger than any words could capture. That night, Samuel reflected on the journey they had begun together. From the marketplace to the ranch, from silence to her first spoken word, every step had been a lesson in patience, courage, and human connection. He realized that true friendship, and perhaps something more, could grow slowly, quietly and unexpectedly, just like the bond between him and Alara. And in the quiet of the ranch, under the wide, star-filled sky, Samuel knew that their story was only beginning. The moment Alara had spoken her name, a new chapter had opened, a chapter filled with promise, trust, and the possibility of a shared life built on understanding and care. The news spread quickly through Willow Creek. Samuel, the quiet rancher, was going to marry the giant woman, Alara. Some townsfolk whispered with curiosity, others with skepticism, but Samuel paid little attention to their opinions. To him, the decision was simple. Alara had come into his life, and they had built a bond of trust, care, and understanding. That was all that mattered. The morning of the wedding, the ranch was alive with activity. Samuel's few friends from the town helped him prepare the yard, hanging simple decorations made from flowers, ribbons, and wild grasses. The wooden fence posts were adorned with bright cloth, and a long table was set with fresh bread, fruits, and flowers from the garden. It was not a grand ceremony by city standards, but it was perfect in its simplicity. Alara stood quietly in the barn, the morning sunlight streaming through the cracks in the wooden walls. Her tall frame seemed even more striking in the gentle light. Today she would remove the sack from her head completely, allowing everyone to see her face without hiding. Samuel entered the barn and gently offered his hand. "Alara," he said softly, "today is our day. You don't need to be afraid. We are together, and that is what matters." She nodded, a small smile appearing on her lips. With deliberate care, she lifted the sack from her head and set it aside. Samuel's breath caught for a moment. Her face, strong and beautiful, reflected both confidence and humility. Her eyes met his, and in that look Samuel saw the quiet courage that had captivated him from the very beginning. Together they walked toward the yard where a small group of townsfolk had gathered. Neighbors, friends, and even curious strangers watched as the unusual couple approached. There were whispers, some of surprise, others of admiration. Children stared in awe at Alara's height, but the atmosphere was warm and accepting. Samuel could feel the eyes of the community on them, but he held Alara's hand firmly, grounding them both. The ceremony itself was simple. Samuel and Alara stood side by side in front of a small wooden arch, decorated with flowers and greenery. Samuel took a deep breath and began, "Alara, from the moment I met you, I knew you were extraordinary. Your strength, your courage, and your heart have shown me what true companionship means. I promise to stand by you, to care for you, and to honor you for as long as we both shall live." Alara's voice was soft but clear as she replied, "Samuel, you welcomed me into your life without judgment. You showed me trust, patience, and kindness. I promise to share my life with you, to work beside you, and to face every day with you, as we have from the beginning." The simple exchange of vows brought a hush over the gathering. Samuel could see the emotion in the faces around him, and even in the silence there was a sense of celebration and respect. When the time came to exchange rings, Alara's hands, though large, were gentle as she placed the simple band on Samuel's finger. Samuel did the same, feeling the warmth of her hand in his. A cheer rose from the small crowd as the ceremony concluded. Samuel and Alara smiled at each other, their bond now sealed in the eyes of the town. Though the wedding was modest, it carried a significance far beyond appearances. It was a celebration of trust, courage, and the courage to embrace the unexpected. After the ceremony, the couple moved to the long table for a simple meal. Neighbors shared bread, cheese, and freshly baked pies. Samuel and Alara laughed quietly at the children's antics and exchanged small, meaningful glances throughout the meal. Their joy was quiet but undeniable, radiating to everyone around them. As the sun began to set, the couple took a walk across the ranch. The fields glowed in the golden light, and the distant hills were bathed in orange and pink. Samuel held Alara's hand, feeling the strength of her presence beside him. "I never imagined life would bring me someone like you," he said softly. Alara looked at him, her eyes reflecting the colors of the sky. "I never imagined finding a place where I truly belong," she replied. "You gave me that, Samuel." The townsfolk watched from a distance, seeing something extraordinary, not just a wedding, but the bond of two people who had found understanding and trust in each other, despite differences that might have seemed impossible. Samuel realized that their story was more than just a union of two lives. It was a lesson for everyone who saw it. True connection did not rely on appearances, size, or tradition. It relied on respect, patience, and the courage to care. That night, after the celebration had ended and the guests had returned to their homes, Samuel and Ilara stood on the porch of the farmhouse. The stars sparkled overhead, and the quiet of the ranch surrounded them. Samuel turned to her and said, "Today was perfect, Ilara. Thank you for trusting me." She smiled, leaning slightly against him. "Thank you for giving me a chance," she whispered. "For seeing me, not just the stories people tell about me." Samuel felt a deep sense of contentment. He knew that life would bring challenges, as it always did, but he also knew that with Ilara by his side, they could face anything together. Their wedding was more than a ceremony, it was a beginning of a life built on trust, understanding, and shared effort. In the days that followed, the story of Samuel and Ilara spread beyond Willow Creek. People spoke of the giant bride and the kind rancher, but the couple paid little attention. They had each other, and that was enough. Every morning they woke to the sound of birds and the gentle rhythm of the ranch. Every evening they sat by the fire, sharing stories, planning for the future, and simply enjoying each other's company. The ranch, once quiet and solitary, was now filled with laughter, work, and companionship. Samuel found joy in Ilara's presence, in her strength and kindness. Ilara found a home where she could be herself, free from fear or judgment. And together, they built a life that neither had imagined when fate first brought them together in the marketplace. As the weeks turned into months, Samuel and Ilara became inseparable. The town gradually accepted them fully, no longer murmuring with curiosity but with admiration. They had shown that love and companionship could grow in the most unlikely of circumstances. The ranch was no longer just a home, it was a symbol of patience, trust, and the extraordinary bond between two people who had chosen each other. And so, under the vast sky and amidst the rolling hills, Samuel and Ilara began their journey together as husband and wife. Their wedding was not grand or extravagant, but it was perfect in its simplicity, because it celebrated the one thing that mattered most: the courage to care, the patience to understand, and the willingness to trust. In that quiet, golden light of the evening, Samuel knew that life with Ilara would be full of challenges and triumphs alike, but he also knew with unwavering certainty that together they could face whatever the future held. The days after their wedding settled into a peaceful rhythm at the ranch. Samuel and Ilara worked side by side, tending to the animals, repairing fences, and caring for the garden. Life was simple, but the simplicity brought a deep sense of happiness neither had ever experienced. Ilara had grown confident in her new life. She no longer wore the sack on her head, and she moved through the ranch with a quiet grace. Samuel admired her every day, her strength, her intelligence, and her gentle nature. He often found himself smiling at small gestures, the way she laughed when the chickens chased her, the way she carefully watered the garden, or the way she noticed the smallest details around the ranch. One morning, Samuel and Ilara walked through the fields as the sun rose. The light painted the horizon in shades of golden orange, and the dew sparkled like tiny diamonds on the grass. Samuel paused and looked at her. "Do you remember the first day you came here?" he asked. Ilara smiled, a small, quiet smile. "I was scared," she said softly. "But I felt something. A feeling that this place could be safe." Samuel reached out and took her hand. "I promised you safety. But what I didn't realize then was how much you would change my life too." Ilara looked at him with her dark, thoughtful eyes. "And you changed mine," she replied. "I never thought I could belong somewhere, until I met you." Their life together was filled with shared labor and shared joy. They rose early to milk the cows and feed the chickens, spent afternoons repairing fences or planting vegetables, and ended the day with a quiet meal by the fireplace. The ranch was alive with the sound of their voices, laughter, and the occasional clatter of tools. Despite their busy days, Samuel and Ilara always made time to enjoy the quiet moments. They would sit together on the porch watching the sun set behind the distant hills, or walk hand in hand through the fields. Words were not always necessary. Often a simple glance or a gentle touch conveyed more than speech ever could. One afternoon, a group of children from the town came to visit the ranch. They had heard stories about the giant bride and wanted to see her for themselves. At first, Alara was shy, but Samuel encouraged her to greet them. Slowly, she knelt to their level, smiling and speaking softly. The children laughed and ran around her, fascinated by her height and her gentle presence. Samuel watched, feeling proud and grateful. Alara had become more than just a companion. She was a part of the community, respected and admired for her strength, kindness, and gentle spirit. He realized that patience and understanding could overcome fear and prejudice. As the months passed, the seasons changed. Spring brought new life to the fields. Summer filled the ranch with warmth and growth, and autumn painted the hills in brilliant shades of red and gold. Samuel and Alara faced challenges, of course. There were storms that damaged fences, animals that needed care, and days when work seemed endless. But together they met every obstacle with determination and teamwork. One evening, after a long day of work, Samuel and Alara sat by the pond. The water reflected the colors of the setting sun, and the air was calm and peaceful. Samuel looked at Alara and said softly, "Do you ever think about the day we met?" Alara nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "I do. I remember the marketplace, the strangers, the noise. And then you. You didn't judge me even when everyone else did. You saw me," Samuel smiled. "I saw more than just who you were. I saw who you could be, and now I see it every day." Alara reached out and took his hand. "And I see you," she said quietly, "not just as a rancher, but as someone who taught me trust and kindness. Someone who showed me a home could be more than a place, it could be a feeling." Their bond, forged through patience, understanding, and shared life, had grown into something deep and unbreakable. They relied on each other, respected each other, and found joy in the simple, everyday moments that made life rich and meaningful. The town continued to watch their lives unfold with quiet admiration. People who had once whispered in curiosity now spoke with respect, recognizing the strength of their partnership. Samuel and Alara had become a symbol, not of what was unusual or strange, but of what could be achieved through trust, kindness, and courage. Years passed, and the ranch flourished. Samuel and Alara worked together to improve the land, plant orchards, and care for the animals. They celebrated birthdays, harvests, and simple milestones with gratitude and laughter. Their story spread beyond Willow Creek, reaching neighboring towns, and inspiring others to see the value of compassion and understanding in everyday life. One winter evening, as snow gently covered the fields, Samuel and Alara sat by the fireplace sipping warm tea. The wind howled outside, but inside the ranch was warm and full of life. Samuel looked at Alara and said softly, "I never imagined life could be this full, this meaningful." Alara smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "It is because we found each other," she replied. "Because we chose patience, trust, and care. Life is always better when you share it with someone who understands you." Samuel nodded, feeling a profound sense of contentment. Their journey from the marketplace to the ranch, from silence to trust, had taught him many things about patience, courage, and the unexpected ways life could bring people together. He realized that love and companionship were not just about words or appearances, but about understanding, respect, and the willingness to stand together through every challenge. As the snow fell softly outside, the couple sat in quiet reflection. Their lives were simple, yet extraordinary in the way they had chosen each other and built a shared life filled with meaning and purpose. Samuel and Alara had discovered that true happiness was not in wealth, status, or recognition, but in the quiet, consistent acts of care, trust, and companionship. And so, the ranch remained a place of warmth, love, and life. Samuel and Alara continued to work together, laugh together, and support each other. Their story became a quiet legend in Willow Creek, a tale of patience, trust, and the extraordinary bond that can grow when two people see beyond the surface and choose to care deeply for one another. Through every season, every storm, and every quiet moment, Samuel and Alara's lives were intertwined in a way that nothing could break. They had started as strangers brought together by chance, and they had grown into partners, friends, and companions who shared a life filled with purpose, joy, and enduring love. And in the golden light of each new day, on the wide-open fields of the ranch, Samuel often smiled as he looked at Alara, thinking quietly to himself, the $2 he had spent in the marketplace was the greatest investment of his life. Not in money, but in trust, kindness, and the extraordinary gift of finding someone who truly belonged beside him.